James Cooper sat in his cramped, dimly lit apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and the hum of the street outside. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. He picked it up without thinking. "Cooper," he said, his voice flat, tired. The voice on the other end was familiar but distorted by fear. "It's Laura," the voice said, breaking Victor Stone. "He's taken them, James. Your mother, your sister. They're gone." James froze, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath hitched. "No," he whispered, dropping the phone, his hands shaking. "No, not again." The call disconnected, and the world around him seemed to spin into chaos. Everything he had tried to leave behind, everything he had hoped to forget, was now part of his present. Victor Stone, the man who had taken everything from him before, had struck again. This time, he would pay. James knew he couldn't face Victor alone. He needed help. Maya Lewis, his childhood friend, was the first person he thought of. She had her own reasons for wanting revenge on Victor. The two had shared too much, lost too much, to not understand each other. After a few moments of hesitation, he grabbed his coat, heading toward her apartment. He couldn't afford to waste time, but the guilt of involving her weighed on him. Victor Stone had done far too much damage to their lives. He knocked on her door. Maya opened it immediately, as if she had been waiting for him. Her sharp eyes scanned him up and down, noticing the urgency in his movements. "James," she said softly. "It's happening again, isn't it?" James nodded, the weight of his silence telling her everything. James and Maya cautiously approached the old warehouse, its windows boarded up, barely a whisper of light sneaking through the cracks. "It's the last place they'd expect us," James muttered. Maya nodded, her hand gripping the gun she hadn't used in years. The plan was simple: break in, retrieve the information they needed, and get out. But James had a feeling the moment they set foot inside, things would go wrong. They crept past the warehouse doors, and just as they were about to enter, a faint noise from behind them froze their movements. Without warning, gunshots rang out, echoing in the night air. A hail of bullets crashed into the walls beside them, forcing them to scramble for cover. "Ambush!" Maya shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. They weren't alone in there anymore. James found himself standing in front of Officer Nolan's office, his heart racing. He had known Nolan for years, a man of the law who always stayed by the rules. But James needed answers, even if it meant stepping over the line. "You're playing with fire, James," Nolan said as he leaned back in his chair, his stern face a mask of concern. "Victor Stone isn't someone you want to get involved with. You don't know what he's capable of." James slammed his fist on the table. "I don't care what he's capable of. He has my family, Nolan. I won't sit around and do nothing." The tension thickened, and Nolan's eyes darkened with regret. "You don't get it. You can't fight him with vengeance. It'll destroy you." James clenched his jaw. "I'll take my chances." He turned, leaving the office with more questions than answers, but the determination in his heart was unwavering. Back at his apartment, James gathered his small team, Maya and a few trusted allies. The warehouse had provided some crucial intel, but it wasn't enough. They needed to hit one of Victor's smaller operations. Maya spread the map out on the table, her eyes scanning the route. "This is where we strike," she said, pointing to a location outside the city. James nodded, determination etched on his face. "We do this tonight. No hesitations." One of the allies, Jake, shifted uncomfortably. "This could get ugly. What if we can't get out?" James looked at him, his voice cold but certain. "Then we die trying." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of their actions sinking in. But there was no turning back. This was their only chance. James Cooper sat at the kitchen table, the smell of stale coffee lingering in the air. His mind raced, as he went over the new information he'd uncovered. His father, Thomas Cooper, had once worked with Victor Stone, but something didn't sit right. There had been whispers of betrayal, and now James had the evidence to confirm it. His father, the man who had always been his hero, had been the one to set the wheels of destruction in motion. James' hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad?" he whispered, as the weight of the truth crushed him. Maya's voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. "You need to let it go, James. The past can't be changed." But James couldn't, not when it meant his father's actions had cost so much. The fight was personal now, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. James and Maya stood outside the rundown building that had once been Victor Stone's first hideout. The cold night air bit at their skin as they exchanged tense glances. Maya broke the silence. "You know what you're walking into, right?" she asked, her voice low but firm. James looked at her, his eyes filled with a resolve she hadn't seen before. "I have to do this. For my family. For my father." Maya sighed, knowing there was no changing his mind. She had seen the obsession in his eyes, the need to uncover the truth. "This isn't just about revenge, James. You have to think about what happens after," she warned, her tone soft but insistent. "There's no going back once we dive in." James didn't respond immediately. His mind was already on the next step of the plan. They couldn't turn back now. As James and Maya entered the building, the air grew thick with tension. They had tracked Victor's men to this abandoned facility, and they knew it wouldn't be long before they encountered resistance. "Stay close," James whispered, his voice steady but filled with adrenaline. They moved quietly through the dark halls, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the cracked concrete floor. Suddenly, a door creaked open, and two of Victor's men emerged. Without hesitation, James lunged, knocking one of the men to the ground. The other pulled a gun, but Maya was faster, disarming him in a fluid motion. The man struggled, but Maya's grip was iron. "Get out of here before I make you regret it," she growled, her voice low and dangerous. The men hesitated, then backed off, running into the shadows. James and Maya shared a brief, knowing look before continuing their search. James and Maya reached a small office at the end of the hallway, where they found a file cabinet, covered in dust and untouched for years. "This has to be it," James muttered as he yanked open the drawer, his heart pounding in anticipation. He pulled out a folder marked "Confidential," filled with documents that detailed Victor Stone's operations and connections. As James flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. His father, Thomas Cooper, had been deeply involved with Victor in more than just a business capacity. He had betrayed James' family, manipulating events to make it look like an accident. Maya stood beside him, watching the horror unfold on his face. "We have to expose this," James said through gritted teeth. "This is the truth." But even as he spoke, the implications of what he had just uncovered gnawed at him. He couldn't deny it anymore. His father had been a part of the monster he was hunting. After hours of deliberation, James finally made his decision. He would confront Victor Stone face to face. The weight of the plan hung heavy on his shoulders, but there was no turning back. Maya, ever the voice of caution, warned him, "You don't have to do this alone, James. This is too dangerous." But James was resolute. "I don't care about the risks anymore. I've already lost everything. This is the only way." Maya's gaze softened, but she didn't argue. "I'll help you. We'll do this together." James nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. They had no idea what they were walking into, but they were ready. The hunt for Victor Stone was no longer just about revenge. It was about justice for all the lives he had ruined. James Cooper and Maya Lewis had barely set foot inside the derelict building when the first wave of gunfire echoed through the empty hallways. The walls shook with the impact of bullets, and James instinctively grabbed Maya, pulling her into the nearest cover. "Get down!" he shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. They crouched behind an overturned desk, the heavy sound of gunshots reverberating off the cracked walls. James peered over the edge, spotting several armed men advancing toward them. The realization hit him like a cold wave. Victor Stone had set them up. The men didn't just want to stop them, they were out for blood. "We can't stay here," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to fight back," James nodded grimly. "We fight, then we leave. No more games." They fought their way through the building, taking cover behind anything they could find as they pushed forward. Maya moved swiftly, disarming one of Victor's men with precision before knocking him out cold. James, his heart racing, fired a warning shot to clear their path. "This isn't over," he muttered as he moved forward. But Maya could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "James," she said, pulling him aside, "we need to rethink our approach." James glanced at her, his jaw clenched. "No," he replied firmly. "We finish this tonight." They continued to push forward, inching closer to the heart of Victor's operation. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Each step, each decision felt like a ticking clock. They were running out of time, and Victor knew it. James and Maya found themselves face to face with Derek Stone, Victor's right-hand enforcer. The man was a hulking figure, his cold eyes narrowing as he stepped into the room, blocking their path. "You're too late," Derek said, his voice low and threatening. Maya's hand tightened around her gun, but James stepped forward, his expression hard. "We're not leaving without answers," he declared. Derek's lips curled into a smirk. "Answers? Victor doesn't need to answer to anyone." Before James could react, Derek lunged, throwing James against the wall with brutal force. Maya moved quickly, aiming her gun, but Derek was faster, disarming her with a twist of his arm. "You think you're strong enough to take down Victor?" Derek growled. James, breathing heavily, struggled to stand. His body ached. "I'm not here to take him down," he spat. "I'm here to take everything back." Maya was quick to regain her footing. Despite the pain, she rushed forward, tackling Derek to the ground. The two struggled, but Maya's resolve was stronger. "You're not going to stop us," she hissed, pinning him down. Derek, surprised by her strength, growled in frustration. But it was enough of a distraction for James to recover. He lunged at Derek, grabbing him by the throat. "You're done," James said, his voice cold, the weight of his anger simmering beneath the surface. Derek's face twisted in fury, but before he could react, Maya landed a punch, knocking him out cold. The room fell silent, the aftermath of their struggle hanging heavy in the air. James looked down at Derek, breathing heavily. "We're one step closer," he muttered. Maya stood, brushing herself off. "But there's still a long way to go." With Derek unconscious and their path cleared, James and Maya made their way deeper into the heart of Victor Stone's operation. The closer they got, the more tense the air became. James knew that the moment they faced Victor, everything would change. Maya stopped for a moment, turning to James. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. James looked at her, his eyes filled with both determination and fear. "I've lost everything to him," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This ends tonight." Maya nodded, understanding the depth of what was at stake. "Then let's finish it," she said. Together, they walked toward the door that led to Victor's inner sanctum. The battle was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything they had lost. James Cooper and Maya Lewis stood outside the dark and imposing building that housed Victor Stone's operations. The moment had come. They had tracked Victor here, and now they would face him. "This is it," James whispered, his breath steady despite the weight of the moment. Maya glanced at him, her eyes hard with determination. "We go in," Take out whatever stands in our way and get Victor. No turning back. James nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. For everything we've lost, he said. They moved forward, each step heavy with purpose. As they reached the entrance, the doors slammed open, and gunfire erupted. They ducked, instinctively, returning fire. The battle had begun, and it was clear that this would be their most dangerous fight yet. The moment they stepped inside, the building erupted in chaos. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and the sound of heavy boots echoed as they advanced through the narrow hallway. James and Maya exchanged fire with masked gunmen, moving fluidly between cover. "Stay sharp," James barked as he moved forward, pushing the door open with force. Maya took down another guard, her gunshots precise and quick. They were relentless, clearing each room as they went deeper into the building. "We're getting closer," Maya said through gritted teeth, her voice calm despite the violence. But James could feel the pressure mounting. The deeper they went, the more intense the fight became. Victor Stone was near, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. After what felt like an eternity, James and Maya reached the final door. Inside, the air was thick with a scent of power and corruption. There, sitting behind a massive desk, was Victor Stone, calm, collected, and waiting. "I knew you would come," Victor said with a cold smile, his voice dripping with contempt. James stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "This ends tonight, Victor." Maya stood behind him, watching carefully, ready to move. "You think you can stop me?" Victor laughed, his hands steepled in front of him. "You've already lost." James' fury boiled over as he lunged forward, grabbing Victor by the collar. "You took everything from me," James growled. Victor's smirk faded slightly. "And now you're going to take everything from yourself," he replied coldly. The tension in the room was unbearable, both men locked in a battle of wills. Without warning, Victor's men stormed into the room, guns raised. A fierce gunfight erupted between the three of them and Victor's loyal soldiers. James fired back, his hands steady despite the chaos, while Maya moved swiftly, taking down each enemy with precision. But Victor remained seated, watching as the fight raged around him. "You're pathetic," Victor taunted. "You'll never win." But James' rage only fueled him more. "I already have," he shouted as he disarmed the last man standing. With a cold finality, James advanced toward Victor, his gun aimed straight at him. Maya stepped forward, her eyes locked on Victor. "This ends now, Victor. Your reign of terror is over." Victor smirked again, but this time, it was a defeated one. The fight was finally over, and the man who had caused so much destruction would face justice. With Victor's capture, James and Maya stood in the silent aftermath of the fight. The tension had left the room, but the weight of their choices lingered in the air. "It's over," Maya said softly, her voice almost a whisper. James didn't respond immediately. His mind was still racing, still processing everything that had happened. "Is it?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Maya turned to face him, her expression understanding but firm. "Yes, James, it's over. You've done what you had to do." James glanced at Victor, sitting defeated, his hands bound. The man who had stolen so much from him, who had tortured, was finally powerless. James took a deep breath, his body heavy with the cost of his actions. "It's over," he whispered to himself, finally allowing the weight of the moment to settle in. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The warehouse, once a hub of Victor Stone's operations, now lay in ruin. James Cooper, standing in the middle of the destruction, took in the sight of the broken walls, the scattered debris, and the lifeless bodies of Victor's men. He could feel the weight of everything that had happened, every loss, every sacrifice. Maya Lewis stood beside him, her eyes scanning the area, still alert despite the chaos. "It's over," she said, her voice quiet but certain. James didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were a storm of emotions: relief, anger, and a deep sense of loss. "Is it?" he asked finally. "Is this really the end, Maya?" Maya looked at him, her face filled with a quiet understanding. "It's over for Victor. But for us, it's just the beginning," she replied. James nodded slowly, knowing that the path forward was uncertain. But at least now, he could begin to heal. As they left the wreckage of the hideout, James and Maya made their way to a quiet corner of the city. It had been hours since the battle ended, but neither of them had said much. James felt the anger still burning inside him. "He took everything," he said suddenly, his voice strained. "My father, my family, everything I knew. It was all a lie." Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. "James, your father wasn't the man you thought he was," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean you need to carry the weight of his mistakes." James clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I don't know how to live with that," he confessed. "How do I move on after everything he did?" Maya's eyes softened with empathy. "You don't have to figure it all out now. One step at a time." James took a deep breath, the weight of the past still heavy on his shoulders. But he knew Maya was right. Healing wouldn't come overnight. James and Maya arrived at Officer Nolan's office. The man who had once been a mentor to James, but had remained silent about the truth. As the door opened, Nolan looked up from his desk, his eyes tired but knowing. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Nolan said, his voice calm but weary. "I didn't think you'd come looking for me after all this." James stepped forward, his face hard. "You knew about my father, Nolan." "You knew everything, and you said nothing," Nolan sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I didn't want to drag you into it, James. I thought you'd be better off without knowing the truth." Maya spoke up, her voice firm. "But you didn't protect him, did you? You didn't protect James or his family from the monster they were dealing with?" Nolan's face darkened. "I did what I could," he said quietly, "but sometimes there's nothing you can do against someone like Victor." James' gaze softened, the anger still there but tempered by the understanding of how deep the corruption went. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm done being silent." Later that night, James and Maya found themselves walking through the quiet streets, the weight of the day settling on them. "I should be angry," James said, breaking the silence. "I should want more revenge, but I don't." Maya glanced at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "Sometimes the hardest thing is letting go," she said. "You don't have to carry that anger with you forever, James. You can choose to be free of it." James looked up at the starless sky, the weight in his chest slowly lifting. "I don't know how to forgive," he admitted, "but I know I can't keep living with this hatred." Maya smiled softly, her hand gently touching his arm. "Then that's the first step." James nodded, his mind clearer than it had been in years. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's time to move on." James stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before him, a reminder of everything he had fought for, and everything he had lost. Maya joined him, standing silently by his side. "Do you ever think we'll find peace?" James asked softly. Maya glanced at him, a small smile on her face. "I think we're already on our way," she replied. "The hard part is over." James nodded, feeling the weight of his journey lift with each passing moment. "It's not about winning or losing anymore," he said. "It's about what we do next." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever that is, we'll face it together." For the first time in years, James felt a sense of hope, a hope that, despite the darkness they had endured, a new chapter was about to begin. James Cooper and Maya Lewis stood in the quiet, dimly lit alley outside the building that housed the final remnants of Victor Stone's empire. The streets were eerily still, the city's hum distant in the background. They both knew that the final confrontation with Victor was near. "This is it," Maya said, her voice steady, though the tension in her posture betrayed the calm she was trying to maintain. James exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. "Everything's led to this moment, Maya," he said, his voice low. "I've lost so much, And yet, this still doesn't feel like enough. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze unwavering. It's never just about revenge, James, she reminded him. It's about taking back what was stolen from you. James nodded, taking a moment to collect himself before the storm. Then let's finish this. As they entered the building, the faint hum of machinery echoed through the empty halls. James led the way, Maya close behind, her senses heightened. Their footsteps were the only sound in the stillness. This is where it all began, James muttered, his voice filled with a mix of anger and nostalgia. Maya glanced around, noting the eerie quiet that seemed to pervade the air. Victor's not here, she said, her hand resting on her gun, but he's close. I can feel it. James didn't respond at first. He was too lost in the memories of the past, his father's betrayal, Victor's rise to power. I never thought it would end like this, James admitted quietly, shaking his head. With him, Maya looked at him, her face softening. It will end with you. You've already fought too hard to stop now. As they approached the inner chambers of Victor's operation, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the silence. I knew you'd come for me, James, Officer Nolan said, stepping into view. James froze, his eyes narrowing as he processed the sight of the officer who had been his ally in the past. But now, Nolan's face wore an expression of regret and something darker. Nolan, James said, his voice low with disbelief. You're working with him, aren't you? Nolan looked away, guilt evident in his eyes. I never wanted this, James. But Victor is too powerful. I had no choice. Maya stepped forward, her voice filled with anger. You had a choice, Nolan. You could have stopped him. But Nolan's eyes flicked to the gun he was holding, pointing at them now. I did what I thought was best, Nolan said, his voice strained. I'm sorry. A moment of silence passed before Nolan took a step forward, lowering his gun slightly. I don't want to hurt you, James, he said, his voice soft but firm, but I won't let you ruin everything. James shook his head, his voice low with fury. Everything? You think you're protecting something by helping Victor? He's the one who ruined everything. Nolan's eyes flickered with doubt. I had no choice. Victor would have killed me if I didn't comply. James stepped closer, his face inches from Nolan's. Then, you're just as much a part of it as he is, James said coldly. Maya's voice cut through the tension. He's not worth saving, James. Let him go. But James didn't respond. He had already made his decision. With a swift move, James knocked the gun from Nolan's hand. You'll face the consequences for your choices, Nolan, he said. But it ends here. James looked down at Nolan one last time, his expression hard. I didn't want this to happen, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. But you've left me no choice. Maya stepped forward, her eyes never leaving James. It's over now, James. Let him go. James hesitated, his emotions a whirlwind inside. He had come so far, and this moment, this decision, felt like it could shatter everything he had worked for. Slowly he stepped back, his face conflicted. Go, James said, his voice cold. If you're not going to help, then leave. You're no longer my ally. Nolan hesitated, then turned, disappearing into the shadows of the building. James stood in silence, his gaze distant. It's done, Maya said softly. Now we finish this. They turned toward the final door, ready to face Victor Stone, their resolve unbroken. James Cooper stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the sprawling city below. The weight of everything he had fought for felt both distant and immediate. Victor Stone was gone, his empire crumbling, but the cost had been high. His father's betrayal still echoed in his mind, and the scars left by Victor's cruelty were not easily erased. Maya Lewis approached, her footsteps quiet but steady. You're still thinking about him, aren't you? She asked, her voice soft. James nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. How do you move on after all of this? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Maya joined him at the edge, standing silently for a moment. "One step at a time," she said, her words offering no easy answers, but a sense of hope nonetheless. "You've already taken the hardest steps." James looked at her, grateful but unsure. "Maybe," he murmured, "but I don't know what comes next." As the days passed, James found himself faced with the final piece of the puzzle, his father's grave. He had avoided it for years, unable to face the truth of what Thomas Cooper had done. But now there was no escaping. Maya accompanied him, offering silent support. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the graves. James knelt before the stone, his fingers brushing the cold surface. "You were supposed to protect me," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "But you were just like him." Maya stood behind him, giving him the space he needed. "You don't have to forgive him, James," she said softly. "But you don't have to carry his sins anymore." James closed his eyes, the weight of his father's betrayal finally sinking in. "I'm done carrying it," he murmured, feeling a small sense of release. With Victor's empire shattered, James and Maya returned to the city, but it felt different now. The streets were the same, yet nothing was. James had reclaimed his dignity, but he knew that the world he had left behind could never be his again. "Where do we go from here?" Maya asked, her voice steady as they walked side by side. James thought for a moment, looking around the bustling city streets. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think it's time to stop running." Maya smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "You've got a long road ahead, James," she said, "but at least you're not alone." James looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. "I never was," he said, feeling a sense of peace settle within him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time he wasn't afraid of what it might hold. James and Maya found themselves in a small, quiet cafe, a far cry from the chaos of the past few weeks. They sat across from each other, sipping their coffee in comfortable silence. James looked around, noting how peaceful everything seemed now. "I almost forgot what this feels like," he said, his voice low. "To just sit and breathe." Maya chuckled softly. "It's not a bad feeling, is it?" she asked. James smiled, leaning back in his chair. "No, it's not." The weight that had once clung to him was now gone, replaced by a calm he hadn't known in years. "Maybe this is what I needed all along," he admitted. Maya raised an eyebrow. "A quiet life?" she teased. James shrugged, a small grin on his face. "Maybe not quiet," he said, "but something better than all the pain." The time had come for James to leave the city for good. He stood at the train station, his bag slung over his shoulder, looking out at the tracks. Maya stood beside him, a quiet understanding between them. "You sure about this?" Maya asked, her voice filled with both concern and hope. James nodded slowly. "I have to do this," he said, his voice steady. "I need to find out who I am without all this darkness." Maya placed a hand on his arm. "Then go," she said softly, "and when you're ready, we'll be here." James turned to face her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Maya smiled, a faint sadness in her eyes. "Take care of yourself, James." As the train arrived, James took one last look at Maya before stepping aboard. He wasn't sure where life would take him next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to find out.